Cuba and Taiwan, passport controversies.
Many researchers who examine the Taiwan question go through reams of paper trying to decide, number one, whether Taiwan meets the requirements to be considered an independent sovereign nation, or number two, whether Taiwan meets the requirements to be considered part of some other nation, such as China. In their view, for any landmass on the planet Earth, there are only these two types of classification: an independent nation or part of another independent nation.
But in 99% of these reports, the researchers typically find that Taiwan fails in some important respects to truly be considered an independent nation. Then, after further analysis, they also conclude that Taiwan also fails in some important respects to truly be considered part of some other nation, such as China.
However, we have to ask the question, are there only two choices? When we speak of the classification of territory, why are these researchers proceeding from the premise it is strictly an either-or situation? In fact, these researchers can be accused of poor research. We can easily find a third category of territory by looking at the Spanish-American War cessions.
Cuba had originally belonged to Spain. However, in the Spanish-American Peace Treaty of April 11, 1899, Spain renounced all of its sovereign rights over Cuba without specifying a receiving country.
So, after April 11, 1899, was Cuba independent? The answer is no. Did it still belong to Spain? No. Was it part of some other country? Again, no.
Although we know that passports were not commonly used in that era, let's examine the hypothetical situation where a native Cuban person wanted to obtain a passport or other similar travel document in January of 1901. The question we want to ask is, what agency would be the proper issuing authority? For the answer, we have to examine Cuban history a bit more carefully.
Looking back to 1898, we can see that there was conflict between Spanish military forces in Cuba and United States military forces on February 15th, and the United States Congress declared war on Cuba on April 22nd. During the war, all military attacks against Cuba were conducted by U.S. military forces, and the Spanish military forces in Cuba surrendered on July 17, 1898. Who has both the responsibility and the right to conduct the military occupation of conquered territory? It is the conqueror, and the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled on this topic on many occasions. In the case of Cuba, the conqueror is the United States. The military occupation of Cuba began on July 17, 1898. The peace treaty was signed in early December and came into force on April 11, 1899. Did the coming into force of the peace treaty mark the end of the military occupation? The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled on this subject too. For territories separated from the mother country via the specifications of a peace treaty after war, the answer is no. The military occupation continues. So, returning to our question, what agency would have the legal authority to issue travel documents to native Cuban persons in January 1901? The answer is the United States military government. A definition of military government is as follows. Military government is the form of administration by which an occupying power exercises governmental authority over occupied territory.
Hence, during this period, Cuba is occupied territory of the United States, but is not part of the United States. In fact, after the coming into force of the peace treaty, before Cuban independence in May 1902, court decisions in the United States found Cuba to be foreign territory under the jurisdiction of the United States. During this time, Cuba had not yet reached a final political status. Its legal status could be described as unsettled or undetermined.
Now let's look at the situation of Taiwan. Taiwan had originally belonged to Japan. However, In the San Francisco Peace Treaty of April 28, 1952, Japan renounced all of its sovereign rights over Taiwan without specifying a receiving country. So, after April 28, 1952, was Taiwan independent? The answer is no. Did it still belong to Japan? No. Was it part of some other country? Again, no.
The delegation of the Republic of China has now decided not to take part to any further proceedings of this General Assembly. Thank you, Mr.
The Republic of China was expelled from the United Nations in late October 1971, and the United States broke diplomatic relations on December 31, 1978. A 2008 District Court decision in Washington, D.C. found that the native Taiwanese plaintiffs were essentially stateless and had been stateless for almost 60 years. Moreover, the book, Treaties in Force, published annually by the U.S. Department of State, contains a summation to the effect that the United States does not recognize the Republic of China as a state or a government.
But wait a moment. The right to a nationality is a basic human right. If the Republic of China is not a state or a government, it seems extremely curious to say that one of its executive departments could be deemed to be the proper agency for issuing passports to native Taiwanese persons. Well, to say extremely curious is putting it mildly. How about changing that to beyond belief? Indeed, such a situation seems of highly questionable legality. Further proof of this assertion is found by noting that courts are regarding the holders of the ROC passport as being stateless. So, the question we want to ask is, under international law, what agency is the proper issuing authority? For the answer, we have to examine Taiwanese history a bit more carefully. Looking back to the early 1940s, we recall that Japanese Empire attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on December 7, 1941, and the United States Congress declared war on Japan the following day, December 8.
Japan began this war in treachery. We shall end it in victory.
Taiwan had been one of Japan's overseas territories since 1895. During World War II, all military attacks against Taiwan were conducted by U.S. military forces, and the Japanese military forces in Taiwan surrendered on October 25, 1945.
As Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, I announce it my firm purpose, in the tradition of the countries I represent, to proceed in the discharge of my responsibilities with justice and tolerance, while taking all necessary dispositions to ensure that the terms of surrender are fully, promptly, and faithfully complied with.
Who has both the responsibility and the right to conduct the military occupation of conquered territory? It is the conqueror, and as stated previously, the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled on this topic on many occasions. In the case of Taiwan, the conqueror is the United States. However, the surrender ceremonies and ensuing military occupation of Taiwan were delegated to the Chinese nationalists led by Chiang Kai-shek. The military occupation of Taiwan began on October 25, 1945. The peace treaty was signed on September 1951 and came into force on April 28, 1952. Did the coming into force of the peace treaty mark the end of the military occupation?
As we stated previously, the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled on this subject. For territories separated from the mother country via the specifications of a peace treaty after war, the answer is no. The military occupation continues. It is also more important to note that with the coming into force of the peace treaty, the Allies have, for all effective purposes, disbanded. However, the role of the principal occupying power goes on.
So, let's return to our question. Under international law, what agency would have the legal authority to issue travel documents to native Taiwanese persons in the current era?
Well, according to the precedent established in Cuba, and indeed in other similar situations, the answer is the United States military government.
Hence, during this period, Taiwan is occupied territory of the United States, but it is not part of the United States. In fact, Taiwan could be described as foreign territory under the jurisdiction of the United States. Importantly, such a determination illuminates the true meaning of the clause in the Taiwan Relations Act which specifies Taiwan as being foreign territory.
Of course, during this time, Taiwan has not yet reached a final political status. Its legal status may be described as unsettled or undetermined. U.S. executive branch agencies have made these types of announcements on many occasions.
But what is the Republic of China in Taiwan? Under the above analysis, the Republic of China is serving two roles. It is, number one, serving as a government in exile beginning December 10, 1949, and number two, serving as a proxy occupying force for the United States in conducting the ongoing military occupation of Taiwan up to the present day.